gonna throw. One-on-one, Davis has it. Touchdown! Carolina wins! Carolina is the Coastal Division champion! Javonte Williams to the left of Howe. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howe looking, standing tall, lets it go, man there! Touchdown! Touchdown, Carolina! The pistol, Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson, he tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted! Surratt intercepts it! Holy cow, Carolina's gonna win! And off to Javonte Williams again, pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back, pressure coming, Aguilar floats it up, incomplete! No flags! Head on back up the mountain! Carolina wins it in double overtime! Loftus, out of the shotgun, throws to the end zone, incomplete! Incomplete! The bell belongs to us! Carolina wins it 47-45 in double overtime!
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Theo at the 35. Theo, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Theo is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys. As always, Josh Marlowe alongside of me as we get ready to preview Carolina and Wake Forest, which will take place tomorrow night in Kenan Stadium. It'll be a blue out. Carolina all blue uniforms. They encourage you, of course, to wear all blue to the game as well. And it'll be an important one for Carolina as they look to get bowl eligible for a sixth straight season. Of course, that would mean every single year under head coach Mack Brown. So we'll talk about that, the game in depth. And then at the end of the episode, we'll talk about, what could possibly be on the table if Carolina was to win this game, even if they were to lose this game. Is there a path to head coach Mack Brown being able to return next season? This was something that I was asked a few times after Carolina's win over Florida State. And when I got to thinking about it, there actually probably is a case for him to return next year. So we'll talk about that here, leading you right up to the tip-off of Carolina versus American on the hardwood. That'll be a great one from the Smith Center. And, of course, we'll have you covered with all of that. Hoping right now we're giving you a little bit of a distraction from what has been a really tough game for the Tar Heel women in the Greensboro Coliseum. I don't care what the name of the Coliseum is. I'm never calling it anything but the Greensboro Coliseum. But a tough go of it for the Lady Tar Heels as they've fallen behind. I know earlier it was a 20-point game. I actually turned it off here just a minute ago to get ready for the podcast. So hopefully we can provide a little bit of a distraction for you. But, yeah, when it comes to this Wake Forest game, I mean, look, the first thing here is that Carolina, they have had a ton of success against Wake Forest. This is the 111th meeting all-time between Carolina and the Demon Deacons. The Tar Heels lead the all-time series 72-36-2. They have been just tremendous, against Wake Forest. The last three times that the teams have met, Carolina has won those games, but all of them have been shootouts and all of them have been one-possession games. So I know that you are one that always likes to point to the fact, and I don't know if it's still true now. I'd have to do the math, and I would think that as we've gotten, a few years past this, that it may not necessarily be true, but close to 1/6 of the wins in program history have come against Wake Forest on the football side of things. So this is always one of those games. I mean, you go back to the last time that these two met, Carolina ends up pulling a massive upset. But as you said multiple times, that was not an upset in your mind, because this is a program that Carolina historically has dominated.
Yeah, the expectation is to beat Wake Forest. They play fun games, they play classic games, they play shootouts, but the expectation is that we should beat them. No different this time around. You've had 2 weeks off, and there's a lot on the line for both teams, but for Carolina to really go ahead and get bowl eligible and take the pressure off of you in the final 2 games, I think makes this game mean a little bit more for the Heels, and so. I expect it to be what they've been since Mack Brown came back. I think it's going to be a fun game. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, but nonetheless, Carolina should win. And hopefully that's the case tomorrow night, because even with the up-and-down nature that Carolina has had this year, there's no doubt which team is playing better entering the game. That's Carolina, and hopefully they look the part tomorrow night in Kenan Stadium.
Yeah, I mean, look, you could have made the argument that Wake Forest was playing bad or was playing just as good as Carolina if they would have won last week. But this is a team that honestly is one of the weirder ones that Carolina is going to face this year, because you look at their overall record, 4-5, 2-3 in conference play. It's really not great. It's not something that you should look at and be fearful of. The thing that is maybe a little bit worrisome is this is a team that's 3-0 so far this year on the road. I don't know what it is, why they are struggling so mightily at home, but for some reason when they go on the road, it's almost like they're a different team. But they are playing really well on the road. And so Carolina's got to be aware of that, and they have to bring the right mindset, I think, into this game. Offensively for the Demon Deacons, look, this is a good offense. It's not nearly as great as some of the ones that they've had in the past. Hank Bachmeier is their starting quarterback, comes over from Boise State, and he's got a unit that right now is averaging 28.1 points per game, 398.5 yards of total offense, 259.4 through the air, 138.7 on the ground. And as I mentioned, Bachmeier, he's a veteran. He's been at this for a long time now. We, of course, mostly remember him in his time at Boise State, but he then went on to Louisiana Tech and transferred to Wake Forest before the season. He actually did not start the year as their starting quarterback. They went with Michael Kern, but eventually he got benched. And Bachmeier has proved to be the right guy. Biggest issue is that he's a guy that can put up the yards. There's no question about that. He turns the ball over a lot, and he holds the ball way too long, from what I've been told from some people that follow Wake Forest in depth. That's led to a lot of sacks, and that's led to a ton of interceptions. And so I think that's one of the things that for Carolina you kind of like to see. It seems almost very similar to the style of player that Anthony Calandria is from Virginia, a guy that Carolina dominated just a few weeks ago. And so I think that's one thing that the Tar Heels have to feel confident in. Now, look, the rest of their skill position players are relatively good. Their wide receiving core is pretty loaded. They have 4 different wide receivers with at least 300 yards receiving. One of those guys, their leading receiver, Taylor Moore, in the slot receiver, he's been at this a while. He's a name that all Tar Heel fans should know. He's had success against Carolina, and being that he is going to be matched up in the slot with Caleb Cost, it is a little bit concerning. Because he's got 606 yards receiving so far this year, so that's a guy that I think Carolina's got to be very aware of. But the whole room is something that I think this Tar Heel secondary has to be ready for. Also, one of the better running backs in the conference resides in Winston-Salem, and that is Damon Claiborne. He's top 5 in all of the major rushing and scrimmage categories. So when it comes to yards on the ground, but also yards from scrimmage, he's a dynamic player. He can do multiple things. He's not Desmond Reed. He's not a guy that is going to at times lead your team in receiving, have a better receiving day than he has rushing, but still is certainly a guy that is worth keeping an eye on. Their tight ends, no threat there. It's a group that can't really catch the ball well, and they've graded out very poorly blocking-wise. So that could be an advantage for Carolina, especially when it comes to those guys on the edge. And then their offensive line. It's a weird group because if you go and look at Pro Football Focus, they've graded out relatively well. They have allowed a decent amount of pressure, but not a terrible amount. This team as a whole, if you just look at the raw stats, they've allowed 29 sacks so far this year, this offensive line. But if you go to PFF and look at how many they credit to the offensive line, it's only 16. So it shows you that the quarterback has been making mistakes, which will bode well for Carolina as well, and that the offensive line is maybe just a little bit better than they'd be given credit for. I think this group is better than the offenses that Carolina faced against Virginia and Florida State, but it's still one that I think is one we should expect this Carolina defense, if they play with the same intensity that they did in that 2-week stretch, they should be able to solve in this matchup.
Yeah, look, Wake Forest is always going to have dynamic playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. Dave Clawson has got that program at a point where he's going to put players in his system and they're going to produce. They're not as explosive, though, as they've been in years past, most only when Sam Hartman was their quarterback, because Hank Bachmeier just isn't that guy. He's a good 20-20 quarterback. He can move the ball up and down the field, but when the field condenses, he's not the type of guy that can make winning plays. And it's odd to see because they've got a senior citizen at quarterback. You'd think a guy as old as he is would be able, to overcome how to handle pressure and how to handle the blitz, not turn the football over. But that's not the case. And so for a defense that the last 2 weeks got after the opponent and really dictated what they did, yes, this offense is better than Virginia's, it's better than Florida State's, but the mindset should still be the same. If you put pressure on Wake Forest's offensive line, if you put pressure on Hank Bachmeier, they're going to make mistakes. They're going to turn the football over. They're going to commit penalties. They're going to allow sacks. And so, hopefully Jeff Collins puts together the same type of game plan we've seen the last 2 weeks, because while Carolina might not be as dominant and giving up, 14 or 11 points, they could really put they could still do enough to Wake Forest's offense to slow them down and not give up the amount of points we've seen the last couple of years to the Demon Deacons.
Yeah, and I mean, look, we'll talk about this defense. We'll talk about the Carolina offense. I mean, the offense is playing well enough to where you don't need these dominant defensive performances. If you want to put together that type of performance, great. But it's hard to expect that dominant type of performance against an offense that is putting up points, that is moving the football. Now, the good news is that, look, offensively, like I said, Carolina's in a rhythm. Defensively for Wake Forest, this is one of the worst defenses in the entire country. They have been bad over the last few years. There's no denying that. This might be their worst defense that they've ever had, which is really saying something. They're allowing 32.7 points per game, 446.3 yards of total offense to opponents, 298.6 allowed through the air, 147.8 rushing yards. So, look, Carolina's strength, we all know what it is. It's the running game. This is a group that you can run on because one of their biggest issues that they've had all over, but especially in the run game, is that they are not a great tackling group. The thing you want to be able to do is you want to be able to attack this secondary. And look, this is a group that is pretty banged up. They're still trying to figure out, who all is going to be available for this game. Their star, I guess their main star at cornerback is Jamari Glasker. Problem is he's given up over 300 yards receiving so far this year. Opposite of him, Jackson Hull is a guy that they've used a lot throughout this year at corner. And, even he's had his moments where he's given up some big plays and allowed really not even big plays have really killed him. It's been more of the amount of catches and the amount of yards. This is a defense that's built on, like we had for the last few years at Carolina. We heard this so much with Gene Chizik, trying to keep everything in front of you. And so their thing is they want to, allow yards to you, but then find a way to bow up and make stops. It's just, unfortunately for them, that's not happening. Middle of the field is an area that Carolina's passing attack should be going after. Nick Anderson, Jr., who's been there a long time. Evan Slocum is beside him at safety. Both of those guys have given up a huge amount of yards for safeties. Both of them over 200 yards allowed so far this year. Nickel corner, Devon Patterson, probably the strength out of that group. And even he's given up some yards. The linebacking core, Dylan Hazen, he's allowed the most catches on the team, 32 on 40 targets so far this year. He's another guy that Carolina can pick apart in the middle of the field, especially with a guy like John Copenhaver, as well as the slot receiver, Nate McCullum, who has started to get going a little bit here with Jacoby Criswell settling into a rhythm. Strength of the group is their defensive front. That is something that we thought coming into the season. Now, the problem is that you do have Jasheen Davis. You do have Kevin Pointer. These guys are getting pressure on the quarterback. They're not finishing consistent enough. This is a team that ranks near the bottom of the country in sacks so far this season. So the pressure has gotten there, but they just haven't been able to finish plays. For Carolina, you're going to want to avoid even allowing that pressure because it's going to allow your quarterback to have more success. So this is one of those units. We saw, Florida State's defense, which was struggling, but people were still talking about how good their defensive line was. Virginia was a team that defensively was playing a lot better than I think people thought. This is probably the worst defense that Carolina has faced this year in conference play, and they need to be able to take advantage of it.
It all starts and ends with being able to establish the run and then pick your poison in the passing game off of that, because Lord knows you can throw at anybody on this defense and expect success. So, I think the unfortunate thing about the second bye coming when it came was that it came when Jacoby Criswell had really found his stride and was being rewarded for good play with wins. But this is not a defense that's going to put up much resistance. Carolina should be able to move the football up and down the field at will. They should be able to run the football, set up the play action pass. And this should be a game that Carolina looks the part offensively and looks the best that they've looked at any point so far this year in ACC play. I think that's my expectation. That should be everyone's expectation, just given how bad Wake Forest has been defensively. And this team gave up 350 yards passing last week to California in the first half. So Carolina should have their field day. Should have a field day with them. It starts and ends with Chip Lindsey's game plan. I think his game plans have been really well this year, and I expect to see him put together another one tomorrow, one that allows Carolina to score and score often tomorrow night.
Yeah, and then you look at their special teams unit. This is one that is worth pointing out because, Matthew Dennis, solid kicker. He's missed 3 already so far this year, but still 14 of 17, not bad. Ivan Mora, 43.5 yard average on his punts. The reason that you have to be careful with this group is because of their punt returner. Taylor Morin is a guy that has been doing it for a while, incredibly successful. 16.5 yards per return, has already found the end zone one time this year. And we know, man, things have not been great with Tom McGinnis. Throughout the year, he started the year all right, but as the year has progressed, his average has fallen off a lot. The kicks aren't getting as much hang time, and it's allowing for returns. And with a guy that's as dynamic as this is one of those games where you worry about a special teams touchdown possibly affecting the outcome. So Carolina special teams has to be ready. You'd love for it's probably asking too much, but you'd love for Tom McGinnis to have a pretty solid day punting the football. But if anything, just find a way to get down the field. This coverage group is going to have to be really, really sound in this game. They've been better in both kick coverage and punt coverage this year, and this is one of the games where that has to show up. We move on to the Tar Heel storylines for this game. And I think the biggest storyline, and the one that everybody's kind of wondering about, is what does this team look like after the second bye week? Because the bye week couldn't have come at really a worse time in terms of how Carolina was playing. This was a team that was relatively healthy. You do like the fact, though, that these guys got a little bit more rest and now can prepare for this 3-game stretch. But they were in a rhythm. That game against Virginia really set everything off because it was a dominant performance, and then you turned around and basically copied and pasted that same type of performance against Florida State. Now the question is, since you've had this time off, are you going to be able to replicate that again in this game against Wake Forest? I think it helps you that you're at home. It helps you that this is a team that, out of the teams that you have to play down the stretch of the season, probably the worst of those 3 teams. I think it's very close, honestly, between all 3 of them. But I do think that this is probably the worst team that you have to play. And it's also an opponent that you've dominated. But, I mean, we know how Carolina works, man. There's times where you think, okay, we'll be able to pick it right back up. And we find out that that isn't necessarily the case. So I'll be interested to see what this team looks like, especially early in the game against Wake, and if there is any rust that they have to knock off.
Yeah, I mean, look, you knew this was coming all along once you got the schedule. So there's really no excuse. Every team in the country has had to deal with this. Every team, because of the way the schedule fell this year, has 2 bye weeks. And for Carolina, you should look at it as a situation where you're as healthy as you've maybe been at this point in the year since Mack Brown came back, because you had 2 bye weeks within a month.
Yep.
And you had 2 blowout wins where you were able to rest guys in a situation where the last couple of years that hasn't been the case. And you know that the next 3 games are very winnable. And you know, if you go out there and you win all 3, this program has momentum going into the offseason, and you should be able to play with the reckless abandon to do whatever you got to do to get 3 wins. So I think it helps that it's a night kick. There will be a different energy, a different buzz in the stadium than there would be if this game was at noon. And, you know, if this team has turned the corner like we think they have, then they'll come out and they'll be ready to play tomorrow night. So be interesting to see. But, you know, at the end of the day, if they're not ready to play, that's going to be an indictment on this coaching staff and on the players, because you knew this was coming all along. So, you know, there's no excuses. This team should be ready to play and be ready to play at a high level tomorrow night.
When you look at this offense, I think the biggest thing that you're looking for them to keep doing is continue to be as efficient as they were during that 2-game stretch. We talked about one of the most important things for Carolina to do when going back to that game against Virginia was to find ways to have success on first and second down. And that's what they did. And it carried over into the game against Florida State. And that has allowed this group to be much more efficient. All you have to do to see that is look at the completion percentage of your quarterback. Because when you put him in these third and short, third and medium situations where teams can't just pin their ears back and get after him, he has been able to have success. Because what was happening before during that 4-game losing streak, where teams were literally just sending 6, 7, sometimes 8 guys after the quarterback, having him throw off his back foot, and it led to incompletions. Now that Carolina is having the type of success that they need to on the early downs, and a lot of that credit needs to be given to the fact that not only is Amari and Hampton continuing to be brilliant, but this offensive line is healthy. They had so many bumps in the road. You know, you go back, Aiden Banfield wasn't even healthy in the first game of the season. He was dealing with an ankle injury during that game, as Mack Brown would tell us in the press conference prior to Charlotte. And really from that point on, you had guys that would exit the lineup, come back in. Now this group is fully stocked. Carolina at times is willing to rotate there, which they weren't in the past. When guys are struggling, they say, hey, we're going to take you out and put you on the sideline. But I also think the play calling has been different. You've seen more of a focus to run the football, which is smart considering the strength of this unit is running the ball. You've got one of the nation's best running backs. And by the way, if you've looked at your two offensive tackles, yeah, there's ways to go for them in pass protection. These dudes are monsters that can just absolutely destroy guys off the line of scrimmage in the run game. And now that it seems like they're starting to realize that, it also helps that you're starting to allow your quarterback to run the football a little bit more. That's allowed this offense to be as efficient as we thought they were capable of being. And now you look at it, this is an offense that sits 20th in the country in total offense per game. We talked about coming into the year how important it was for Carolina to be in that range again, especially with a questionable defense. It's taken some time, but now that you've found your quarterback and now that his offensive line is helping him out, you see just how good this offense can be.
Yep, and they were the living example of one of the biggest cliches in football. You got to stay ahead of the chains. For 4 weeks, they did not. Teams sent 7-8 dudes at a quarterback that might be experienced in terms of what his, being a fourth-year senior or whatever, but hadn't played a lot of football on the actual football field. You make some adjustments. You reshape your offensive focus. You run the ball. You quit trying to force the ball downfield in the passing game and just get it out of his hands and get it to your playmakers in space, and it's night and day. And this offense looks as explosive as it looked at times with Sam Howell, with Drake May, despite them not being the same level of talent, A, at the quarterback position, B, at the skill position groups. And so really got to credit Chip Lindsey and that offensive staff, stay in the course and really identifying what Jacoby Criswell does best and really realizing, man, you've gotten the second best running back in the country on your roster. Give him the football. Good things are going to happen. And as long as Carolina continues to do that, I think it's fair to expect this offense to put up the numbers week in, week out down the stretch to give this team a chance to win the ball game.
Yeah, and I mean, look, when Jacoby first entered and we watched his first couple of starts, we said, look, he's not going to be what Sam Howell and Drake May are. I don't know if he's in that range yet, but he's starting to prove that there is a lot of talent there. And this is a guy that isn't really that far behind him. Like this guy that we're seeing right now, it makes a little bit of sense why he was battling Drake May as hard as he was. Where when we were told that back, a couple of summers ago, we were kind of left scratching our head. And especially after we saw Drake play, this dude has taken his game to another level, and it has this offense playing at a different level. Speaking of guys that have taken their game to the next level, well, how about what Kamen Rucker has been able to do for this defense? And this group now hoping to build off of their two-game success. I think it's hard to be 100% confident in a Carolina defense. It's going to be a long, long time before we are able to do that. This is a relationship that this is like the 8th or 9th time you guys have tried because the person has cheated on you over and over and over again. And yet for some reason, you're still giving them a chance. That's how I feel like I am with this defense. I know I shouldn't have any belief with what they have shown us year over year, but the way that they played in these last two games, it really has you believing that maybe it was that Kamen Rucker was banged up and wasn't a part of this group, because the way he's been rushing the passer the last couple of weeks, I mean, he's been absolutely tremendous. It seemed to awaken something in Bo Atkinson, and that defensive line as a whole has really just taken over. The interior of that group, you've seen Jahvaree Ritzie after being silent for pretty much the middle portion of the season where you didn't hear anything from him. At times, you even wondered if he was out on the field. He's starting to make plays again. You've seen Josh Harris step up as well on the interior. And, it's really made the jobs of the linebackers, who were once again tasked with so much as they were in years past. It's made their jobs a lot easier. They've done a much better job of filling gaps because guys are where they're supposed to be. Guys are creating some initial resistance and allowing them to just fill in and be where they need to be to finish plays, as opposed to having to be in the right position to even have a chance at making a play. So the way that this defense has looked, primarily that defensive line, would have you believing that there is a chance that Carolina can continue the type of success that they've had. But this will be a test, because this is an offense that has, the ability to put up points, has the ability to move the ball down the field pretty successfully. So they have to be ready for a fight in this one.
Yeah, they do. But like we said, this isn't as explosive of an offense as we've seen in years past from Wake Forest. And this is an offense that if you put pressure on the quarterback, they're going to make mistakes. And so I think, a lot of it does start and end with Kamen Rucker. I think it also, Jeff Collins made the adjustments during that bye week to put their guys in better positions to make plays, probably simplified some things up front as well. And more importantly, I think they're just playing for one another. And defense is, that's a big part of it, is just playing for one another, trusting that everyone's going to do their job. And, when that happens, you see the type of performances that Carolina has put together. I don't expect that level of dominance over the course of the last three games. You're playing better football teams, but you should be at a point to where if this offense gives you 28 plus points or more, you should feel comfortable winning the ball game. And that's not where we were in October. In October, we got back to the point where you probably had to score 35, 40-plus points to give yourself a chance. If the last two times we've seen this defense are any indication, that shouldn't be the case. And that gives Carolina a really good chance to finish the season strong.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we had gotten back to the point where one of our keys was the classic key that we have gone with at least once a year under Mack Brown for probably the last 3 or 4 years, which was score, and score more, because you knew that the defense was not going to be able to hold up. That defense that we saw 2 weeks ago was not the same defense. That 2-game stretch was some of the best defense that we've seen this team play. That looked a lot like what we saw in the opener that had us feeling confident that this group could take a step forward. And you're right. Jeff Collins adjusted some of the things that he did, really allowed these guys to reset. He also became more aggressive. And I think he learned that, look, this secondary is not great. There's a chance that this group can get picked apart. And that's still the case. We saw it at times against Florida State, where there were a couple of explosive plays down the field that Florida State was able to hit on that group. But you need to be aggressive in how you're getting after the quarterback, because when you are, and when those quarterbacks are under pressure, you can create turnovers. And you look at the quarterbacks that Carolina has to face now. You got Bachmeier, who's shown you that he's experienced, but that he is going to turn the football over. You've got a guy now in Grayson James, who is taking over for Thomas Castellanos, who was the quarterback the entire year at Boston College. They like him, but I don't think he's perfect by any stretch, or he would have been starting earlier in the year. And then you've got a guy, a true freshman in Cedric Bailey, who last year at this time was playing high school football with Davian Goss, who's in your backfield. So, I mean, look, these are far from the most difficult quarterbacks you will face. If this group can build off of what they did, they have a chance to succeed. Now, here's the ultimate question when it comes to this game. Because if you don't know this already, Carolina's an 11-point favorite in this game. So I know a collective groan comes out whenever we say something like that. And believe me, I did the same thing when I saw this line initially. How does Carolina handle being a double-digit favorite? Because, man, we have been here so many times. And so many times since 2021, Carolina has let us down over and over again as a double-digit favorite. They did it earlier this year. So Now, this group needs to come out and prove that they deserve to be a double-digit favorite. They were a favorite at Florida State, 2.5-point favorite, and to be honest with you, they probably should have been more because Florida State is that bad. But here's the thing. Carolina, this is a game that so many times over the last few years, they have found a way to lose. This is a game you have to find a way to win so that you can continue what we have asked this team to do for the last few years, which is close the year strong.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, I think if Carolina loses, it's going to be a real indictment. I mean, maybe on this team, on the betting people making this team a double-digit favorite. I think Carolina should be favored to win the game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're at a point where this team should be favored to win, to beat anybody by double digits. So
I would agree with that.
You know, the line is very questionable, but this is something that has been a bugaboo for Mack Brown. We've been in the stadium for two of the biggest losses as double-digit favorites the last couple of years. Virginia a year ago, Georgia Tech 2 years ago.
Don't forget Florida State. We were there for that one in 21 too.
And that team shouldn't have been a double-digit favorite over anybody either. Like, if Carolina loses, it's not going to be to the same level as the losses the last couple of years, but it would just be, you know, another, I guess, indictment on Mack Brown's inability to capitalize when his team is expected to win. So, it's going to be, I guess, interesting to see what the narrative is if Carolina loses, because if you're a big betting person, and we're not, but, you know, we talk about these types of stuff every day in our jobs, the line to me does not make a whole lot of sense. I thought Carolina would open up maybe 6.5, 7-point favorites over a middle-of-the-road ACC team, which is what Carolina is, but nonetheless, if they lose, it'll just be another talking point for people that like to make fun of Mack Brown when he loses as a double-digit favorite.
The only explanation that I can have for it, honestly, is that Wake Forest last week looked as bad as they did at home against a team that I guess most people looked at as the worst team in the conference because they didn't have a conference win until last week. That's the only thing I could think. And to be honest with you, that still doesn't make sense because if you watched Cal play, you knew the reason that they did not have a win was just because they could not close out close games. It's not that they were a horrible football team. I mean, look, could Carolina win this game by double digits? Yeah. I mean, because here's the thing. Is Wake Forest a better team than Virginia? Hell no, they are not. Virginia proved that last week, that they are a good enough team because I know Eli Holstein got hurt. They still went on the road and beat Pittsburgh. That's a better team than Wake Forest, but it doesn't matter. Carolina should not be favored by double digits, but it is what it is. You can't worry about that. And that leads us into the first key to the game. The thing that Carolina has struggled with in these games is it seems like there are times where they don't come out ready to go, and they don't play with a purpose. This is a game you have to play with a purpose. The purpose is look, you're wanting to, make a bowl game, one, but we don't know about the future of Mack Brown, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit about what it could potentially be. But this could be the last year with Mack Brown here. This is also a year that you've dedicated to one of your teammates who passed away from cancer. This is the type of game where the effort should not be questioned. The level of preparation should not be questioned. This should look like a team that is still hungry. Yeah, you won 2 in a row. But here's the thing. You could finish with a 3-game losing streak at the end of the year and not make a bowl game. And who knows, even if you do make a bowl game, it doesn't really matter. I want to see this team come out with a fire lit under their rear ends. And I want to see them playing like this game is important because at times in the last few years when they've been double-digit favorites, you just haven't seen that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that you want to secure bowl eligibility to take the pressure off of you going into your final 2 games where you got a road trip to Boston College, just a eerie, difficult, weird place to play. And then you got a rivalry game with NC State that, quite frankly, we don't expect you to win anymore because of what's happened the last couple of years. So I think there will be a sense of urgency with this group to lock up that bowl eligibility. It's the first home game at night this year.
Yes.
And we know how good those crowds have been since Mack Brown returned to Chapel Hill. So there will be a natural energy and a natural buzz for them to feed off of. So, and look, it all comes down to was the last 2 weeks real or was it fugazi? And I think we'll really find out that answer tomorrow with the way that Carolina approaches this game and performs in this game. Don't expect Carolina to blow them out by no means, but you do expect Carolina to play at a high level, and we'll get that answer in the early part of the game.
Yeah, and look, I know it's going to be tough to really ask people to do this, but if you can make it to the game tomorrow, we can't. But if you can make it to the game, please go out and support this team because they are doing everything that they can to try to turn it around. The passion that they played with in their last 2 wins in honor of their teammate is something that should be a reason for you to show up to the stadium. I don't care your thoughts on Mack Brown, your thoughts on the program as a whole. These kids battled their ass off 2 weeks in a row. They are fighting hard. So show up and give them an environment that they can be proud of. It's a night game. There's no excuse about it. It's an early kick. Yeah, Carolina was in that CW window. Hell, they'll be in that CW window again next week when they play Boston College. But this is a game that you need to show up for, wear blue, and be loud. The second key to this game for Carolina on the field is get pressure on the quarterback. You saw the difference that it made against Virginia and against Florida State. And look, when you look at Florida State, those quarterbacks, we knew that they were going to struggle. We talked about that coming in. What they did to Anthony Calandria, taking a guy that was in a tremendous rhythm in the previous 3 games and turning him into a guy that turned the football over twice and could not get a pass down the field without it being contested. That's what you should be shooting for in this game against Hank Bachmeier. Turned it over 3 times in the game against Cal, all interceptions. You want to recreate that type of performance. Doesn't mean you have to come away with 2 or 3 interceptions, but you want to be able to get the type of pressure that you have been getting on the quarterback the last couple of weeks on this quarterback again in this game. If Carolina does that, and they need to do it because their secondary is still a question mark, they have a great chance to win.
Well, everything looks better when you put pressure on the quarterback. All of a sudden, your secondary looks better. It feels like you're tackling better, and you're going up against another offense and another quarterback that when they start giving up pressure, it really brings everything down with them, and they start making mistakes, turning the football over, committing penalties, and really bogging down their offense is a big reason why they're not as explosive in terms of the point scoring as we've seen in the past couple of years from Dave Clawson's bunch. So the mindset needs to be the same from Jeff Collins in terms of putting together an aggressive game plan. It's different because they run the mesh point. So you do got to account for that. But, if you're in the backfield, you can disrupt that mesh point, and all of a sudden what Wake Forest doesn't become as difficult to stop. So I think you'll see Kamen Rucker, Bo Atkinson, the guys up front play with their hair on fire. And look, I don't think it's going to be as dominant as it was the last couple weeks, but if Carolina can put consistent pressure on Hank Bachmeier, he's going to put the ball in harm's way. He's going to take some sacks that might take them out of field goal range, and that might be the difference in the ball game. If Carolina can record, I'd say 3+ sacks tomorrow night, I think it goes a really long way to them coming out of this game on the winning side.
Yeah, I mean 3, 4. That was the range that I was looking at, probably 4 in this game, and just get consistent pressure. Getting 7 or 10 sacks like in the previous 2 games might be asking a little too much. Now on the flip side, third key to the game is to protect Jacoby Criswell. And this is important because you look at how bad this passing defense is for Wake Forest. If you can keep your quarterback clean, we've seen what Jacoby Criswell can do in a clean pocket. He can tear people apart. And I think this is another one of those games where if you give him time to throw, he is going to pick apart this secondary. Yes, running the football is going to be important. But when you are facing a team that allows almost 300 yards passing per game, you have to be able to throw the football. That's what we saw last week from Francisco Mendoza and Cal, and you would expect that we're going to be able to see that again in this game, but it comes down to how well this offensive line protects their quarterback. There's reasons to believe that they took steps in those areas in the prior 2 weeks before the bye, but this is a group that for Wake Forest that has a guy like Jasheen Davis, who was a highly touted pass rusher coming into the year, a guy on the interior and Kevin Pointer, who leads the team in sacks with 5 so far this year. So for Carolina, this offensive line has to show up in this game and protect their QB.
Yeah, and the best way to do that is be able to run the football and keep Carolina ahead of the chains to where Wake Forest ends it, sending 7, 8 guys at him. And the best way to do that is to avoid being in 2nd and 8, 3rd and 7, and longer. And so I think there's going to be a stubbornness to running the football. But with the way that Omarion Hampton has ran the ball really all season long. And then I think one of the adjustments we've made in the passing game is just getting the ball out of his hands quicker and not trying to force the football down the field before you set up those play action shots to actually push the ball down the field. So, it starts and ends with Carolina's ability to run the ball, to stay ahead of the chains, and avoid those 3rd and long situations, because we know that's when every defense that we've seen the last couple weeks, and we'll see the rest of the way, will pin their ears back and go after him. So, the offensive line has done a really good job the last couple weeks. And they'll look to continue that tomorrow night against a defensive line that has talent, but does have the ability for you to really wear them down as the game moves along.
All right, let's get to our predictions for this game. Carolina, as I mentioned, an 11-point favorite, 8 p.m. kick on ACC Network. What do you see happening?
Yeah, I think Carolina wins. I always expect Carolina to win the game. Consider the dominance against Wake Forest in our lifetime. They're usually high-scoring classics. I think we'll be in for another shootout tomorrow night. I think Carolina wins 38-31.
Ooh, yeah, that would not be great for the blood pressure for some people, but yeah. I do think that it is going to be a close game. There's no doubt about that because, look, this is a team that Carolina's played classics against. I'd like to believe that it's not nearly that high scoring, but I think Carolina's offense is good enough to where if it's going to be a close game, then, yeah, it probably is going to be a high scoring affair. I think this is one of those games, we've seen Carolina's offense more efficient because they run the football, more time comes off the clock. So I think whichever team gets into the 30s will be able to win this game. I don't think it'll be as high scoring as you're predicting. But, yeah, I think Wake Forest will keep it close, but Carolina ends up getting the victory 34-28 in Kenan Stadium. All right, real quick. We got about 10 minutes before Carolina gets ready to face off against American on the hardwood. Let's talk about Mack Brown and his potential future here, because I wrote an article that a lot of people read over the weekend, and a lot of people were fired up about this article. A lot leaning in the direction of him not coming back for next year. But as the week went along, the comments started to become more and more in favor of Mack Brown returning, to where I wouldn't say it was 50-50, but I would say probably 70-30 in terms of people that want him gone. This is a far cry from where we were after that James Madison game. So the question is, let's say that Mack Brown gets to 8 wins. Now, it has to involve a win over NC State. That is a non-negotiable. It just there's no way that you can lose to them again this year. And even if you get to 8 wins, I think keep your job next year. But no matter how they end up getting there, if they get to 8 wins along with a win against NC State, would Mack Brown potentially return next season? Could that potentially be on the table? And a lot of people initially were like, how is that even possible? Here's the thing, and I'll present the case and then I'll allow you to respond. If he does find a way to get to 8 wins, that would mean that in 9 of the 16 years that he's been in Chapel Hill, he has found a way to get to the 8-win mark. It would get the monkey off his back that he's had the last 3 years of NC State and not being able to beat them. This year's team is one that is certainly beatable, so there is no excuse for Carolina to not come out energized and to come out on the other side with a victory, especially at home. So if he does both of those things, and especially if one of those wins ends up being the bowl game, which has been another issue for Carolina since he has returned, the fact that they simply cannot win a bowl game, then I think there is a case for him to return next year. And if he ends up making that decision, then I think Carolina fans should probably be on board with it.
Yeah, I'll keep this really short and simple because we got to go here. Been very critical of Mack Brown. I've never want to force out the best coach in program history. I think the guy has earned the right to step away when he wants to step away. He's the best that we've ever had. I find it hard to believe that we'll find someone that will do a better job than he's done in his 2 stints in Chapel Hill. But it all comes down to how does it look. If Carolina goes 2-1 down the stretch but loses to NC State, it's going to be really hard to justify bringing him back. If he goes 2-1 but loses to Wake Forest but beats Boston College and beats NC State, okay, I think there's a scenario where he comes back. If he goes 3-0, you shouldn't want to force him out because he would have won 8 games in a transition year with the program after he lost the number 3 pick in the NFL draft in Drake May. And I know that the middle of the year wasn't great, but this is a program that at its best wins 8 games. If he does that this year, how do you argue with that? So it's right now it's TBD because you got to see how it looks. But as someone that has voiced his criticism of Mack Brown, and rightfully so, I'm not comfortable forcing out the best coach this program has ever had.
Yes, I agree with that. And I do hear what people are saying with the fact that he is the best coach that this program has ever had. Who's to say that the next guy that's coming in is going to be able to be better than what he has done in his time? I don't think there's anybody that's guaranteeing that. Anybody who's trying to guarantee that, they don't know what they're talking about. But what do I think ultimately is the best thing for Carolina moving forward? The best thing is for him to retire at the end of the year. And I think that's certainly in play with what he said after the James Madison game. He took an hour to think about it, which I think is very, very telling. It tells you that that wasn't something that had just jumped into his mind. He has thought about that before. And I do wonder, naturally, as it would with anybody, having someone that you were so close to in Tylee Kraft pass away in the middle of this season had to take a pretty significant toll on him. So I think there is plenty of reason where if he steps away at the end of the year, it makes a lot of sense. I think that's what's probably best for the program. But what I'm saying is, when I'm saying people should be on board, if he decides to come back off an 8-win season where you beat NC State, I don't think Tar Heel fans should be rioting and saying this is the worst thing, because he will have done what we asked him to do. I begged him before the season started, close a year strong. If that means you start off slow, it is what it is. Just finish a year strong, because getting your hopes up and then having them crushed year after year is starting to get frustrating. I think there is certainly a possibility that this happens. We've laid it out. The teams that you face down the stretch of the season, they all have 4 or 5 wins coming into this week. Now, there will be a level of desperation that those teams will play with, so you have to be prepared for that. But I think there is certainly a path for Carolina to get to that 8-win mark. Now it's about going out there and actually doing it. And I think if you get to that, no matter what happens, you should be on board with it for next year, because getting to 8 wins after where this group was at would be phenomenal. Guys, head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. I told you I got that article up there where I break down, the potential case for Mack Brown to return in 2025, what that could look like. And I go more in depth on why I believe that him stepping away from the program is probably the best thing, but why, if he chooses to return, you should be on board with it. So check that out. We'll have the preview up. I'm going to put that up in the morning for you guys, just so that it has the latest. There's a bunch of injuries on the Wake Forest side that I'm still trying to figure out whether certain guys will play. So that'll give me a little bit more time to figure that out. It'll also be a great way to promote the podcast, which will be attached to the bottom of that article as well, if you missed any of this portion. So make sure you guys check that out. And of course, tonight, just moments from now, Carolina about to take the Smith Center floor against American. So we're going to have you covered. We've got a preview up on the website right now that you guys have been checking out. So that means, of course, we will have a recap after the game is over. So make sure that you check that out, and check out the latest edition of the Four Corners podcast, wherever you get your podcast, as we will recap whatever tonight's game against American looks like for you guys. So make sure you head over, turn your TVs over now, check out Carolina on the hardwood. And then, of course, we will be back here on Monday night recapping whatever happens on Saturday against Wake Forest. But for now, I want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.